Hey, welcome to the Weekend Garage, and this weekend I'm going to show you the stock turbo on my car, show you the upgrade of the newer generation that I'm going to be swapping onto my car, and all the other little details that you need to know for swapping that turbo onto this car. We'll go ahead and get to talking about the turbos. Stay tuned. Alright, so here we got just my stock engine bay. Go ahead and show you around just a couple of things that I've done to it so far. I've been trying to make it look more stock just so that so when I go to car shows, I guess nothing too flashy. That's not really my style. Under the hood doesn't get seen very often, so I don't really see the need in making sure everything is polished and trying to keep it clean all the time, since this is primarily a daily for me. So what you're gonna see is I have aftermarket intercooler pipes on here, along with the aftermarket front mount. We'll see if we can get it. I tried to hide it a little bit in here just so that it wasn't sticking out. And these intercooler pipes, you know, they come polished just like everything else. The factory intercooler pipes are actually a textured black color just like this. So I decided to recoat these so I get a more stock look to it. The only way you can tell is these T-bolt clamps that I have on there. There's only a couple things on here. You can see I have catch cans on the intake manifold and on the intake side. Aftermarket blow-off valve solenoid. It just has a lot quicker response time to it, so I can get this valve to open up a lot faster in between shifts. Overall, just the next level up in performance from a stock valve. So we're going to see if we can get in here. The stock turbo is hidden pretty well on these cars. Alright, we'll get a light in here and then hopefully we can see it. And right here you can see the exhaust side. I just have a cheap turbo blanket on it, help keep a little bit more of the heat in there, just because with this aftermarket O2 housing you can't, or I was unable to keep the stock heat shield on there. So we'll see if we can get a little bit more. And then, yep, there we go. We can see just the compressor housing, you can see the compressor housing just a little bit. Sorry for the lighting, it's kind of hard to see in here. So the first generation Genesis has just they have just a standard regular pneumatic wastegate on there. The second generation moved to an electronic wastegate, and when I pull out the other turbo that I will be swapping on there, we'll take a little bit of a look at that and how you're able to put it onto this car. Alright, so now that I got everything set up for what I'm going to be running on my next turbo, I'll give you a little bit closer look at what the plans are. So I don't have the stock turbo out here, but it's very similar to the new one, and it's still very similar, so we'll be able to get a good idea of what that looks like. So one of the things that I pointed out, actually, you know, let me bring you a little bit closer so you can see. Okay, so now that we're a little bit closer, I'll give you a little bit better look at the turbos and what's changing between them. Alright, so this is the stock compressor housing off of the generation of the Genesis that I have, that one, the first generation. Difference between this one is that as far as I know, the actual size of it is the same. It's just that on the second generation they get rid of this flange on the compressor housing. And then also, you know, we've got a pretty small opening. It's like I mentioned previously in the last video, this is only a 13T. The the next one, and then this is the turbo off of the second generation. Where it is different is that the manifold and the turbine housing are all one piece in this one. And that's because they went to a twin scroll design, which, if we come over here, if you get enough light, you can actually get the idea of it when this is open. Yeah, sorry, you won't be able to see it too much, but right here in the middle, there's a little divider because you have the flows from the cylinders that are separate in order to spool it faster. So this turbine housing did get a little bit bigger compared to the first generation. And then what you're seeing too is the new compressor housing, and it's got this big flange on there because it had this big nasty electronic wastegate that sits over here, and it controls this. Now there's pros and cons to the electronic wastegate, because then you can have the ECU control everything, and that will regulate boost very accurately for you, versus on a conventional turbo, you can see that has the mounts here for a more conventional wastegate where it goes based off of vacuum. Yeah, it's electronically controlled by a solenoid, but that only lets you increase boost higher than what the spring would be set for the stock wastegate. So here I grabbed the new wastegate that I have that'll be going on. It's an upgraded Forge wastegate, 14 psi spring that's in it. So what it'll do is it'll keep it closed longer, allowing me to spool faster. So in order to run the second generation turbo on the first generation Genesis Coupe, the flange for the head is actually the same, and so it'll still bolt on just fine, just like it normally would. You should be able to use all the stock oil and water lines, but one of the big differences is this flange. You can see we've got a 5-bolt flange on this side. The stock first generations only have a 3-bolt flange. So you do have to get the correct O2 housing for this guy. But it bolts up. All generations use the same like catback exhaust on it, or I should say O2 housing back exhaust. They all are the same as far as I know. So what you end up doing is, since this one is a 19T, you could use this housing, but it makes things a lot more difficult because you don't have any mounting points over here for your wastegate, or I should say the wastegate actuator, and you've got all this stuff, and it looks pretty ugly. And so I got a little too excited when I first got this turbo, so I've already had it apart, so it's going to come apart a lot easier than it normally would. So what I'm going to do is actually end up not using this compressor housing at all, and we're going to end up taking the stock one that I have, and we'll just end up putting that one on. So now what we can do is we'll have our mounting locations for the wastegate actuator, and we'll be able to make up a mount. There's a little bit of modification that'll have to go to this arm right here to actually move this flapper, because it's going the opposite direction that it needs to right now. So this will actually have to get flipped over to the other side and welded over there in order to actuate correctly. The other big changes is that this is the stock size on the second generation turbo. This is a 19T. So a 13T from a 19 to a 19T is a lot bigger. I'm not going to be running this wheel. I'm going to be getting like a Garrett GTX style 20T wheel. Because you'll see on this one, this is a 6+6 design where it's kind of got that one tall blade and then the one short blade. The GTX style is they're all tall blades. more surface area, it gives you better flow, and then it's a bigger wheel yet from this. So what you have to end up doing is taking this housing over to a machine shop, and they will actually just machine out this radius to match with your new wheel, new compressor wheel. And they're only machining out a few millimeters. And then you just assemble it back into the center section just like you normally would. So the other thing that I am changing is that if you look at these two turbines here, this is the OEM one. You can see that obviously. We'll get it to focus. This one is the one that was in there. On here, this one is actually 11 blades, or maybe a 12 blade, I can't remember which one. The common upgrade is to go to this, which is a 9 blade, and this will actually help it spool a little bit slower, but also there's less restriction with fewer blades on it. And with it running a turbo that is this small, getting a little bit slower spool is exactly what I'm looking for. It's only going to be about 500 RPM slower than this stock blade, or this stock turbine wheel. But that should be perfect because it should allow me to still have a lot of fun on the street, get a lot of that low end power that I'm looking for, but it'll help me hold boost much closer to redline than it would on a smaller wheel like this. The compressor wheel is also going to help me out a lot on that. And overall, I think it's going to be a really good combination for a really good street setup. But when I bought this turbo, the person that I bought it from, you know, it was off of eBay. They were selling a stock turbo. They weren't fully honest with me, and they actually sold me a blown turbo. However, I still got it for a pretty cheap price. And this is actually a really reasonable upgrade for people that don't want to go through all the extra effort doing a custom manifold and putting on like a T3 flange turbo and going a full custom route. This allows you to keep most of your stock parts with it. And I mentioned this, that I got this off of somebody on eBay, and since they said it was a good and it wasn't, I actually got a rebuild kit for it, and I'll make sure that when I'm doing the rebuild on it, that I film everything. It's a pretty easy process. You just got to make sure that you stay paying attention to a lot of the details on it. And if you're swapping compressor and turbine wheels like I am, that you make sure you get them balanced together, because if they're not balanced, that can really affect the long-term lifespan of your turbo. But if it's something that you want to learn, it's good to learn on these smaller turbos before you get something too big, get something too complicated. But you just have to always be aware that if you make a mistake on it and something happens to the turbo, that you're not going to have the same warranty that you would going to a shop to do it. So you just have to be conscious that you might have to rebuild it. But again, the kit that I got, I think that was like $45, something like that. So they're pretty cheap if it's something that you want to learn how to do. I think this video went a little bit longer than what I wanted to do. Like I said before, I worked a lot this week. I got some other projects that I need to get doing around the house, and it is freezing out here in the garage. I think it's only about 10 or 12 degrees today, and I've had to have the garage door open most of the time. So if you like what you see, you know what to do. Again, if there's any specific content that you want to see me make, let me know in the comments, and I will see you guys next time. Oh, and one last thing here. If you want to see any of the other projects that I'm doing, make sure you let me know. I got a lot of other projects that I have planned to do inside the house. I'm going to be building and making things anyway. So if you want to see that, let me know.